This video talks about interval notation. Now, this is really important in this course because a lot of our answers have to be in the form using interval notation. What interval notation indicates is an interval of x values, or it could be an interval of y values, but you list the smallest possible value first and the largest possible value last. If an endpoint is not included, so if it corresponds to a strictly less than or strictly greater than, then we use a parenthesis at that endpoint. Parenthesis is just the singular of parentheses. So a parenthesis means that the endpoint is not included. If an endpoint is included, corresponding to a less than equal to or a greater than equal to, then we use a square bracket at that endpoint. Infinity and negative infinity always use a parenthesis. So what we want to do is take these inequalities and write them using interval notation. First one is x is less than or equal to 2. So I want to go ahead and think about what that would look like on the number line. So if I was looking at this on the number line, here's 0. To the right of 0, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. To the left of 0, I have -1, -2, -3, -4. And the number line goes on infinitely in both directions. Now, I have x is less than or equal to 2. The or equals to means that the endpoint is included. If I were to graph this on the number line, then I would go ahead and put a solid dot at 2, and then the less than would go off to the left. So that would be the graph of it on the number line. And then if I wanted to translate that to my interval notation, then what I would do is look for a lower bound. There's no lower bound here, so I'm going to do negative infinity. And infinity or negative infinity always uses a parenthesis. So this indicated that there was no lower bound. And then I do a comma, and then 2 is my upper bound. And because of that or equals 2, that means 2 is included, so I use a bracket. So bracket to include the endpoint. So to include 2. So this would be the interval notation of x is less than or equal to 2. All right, let's look at another one. So we have -4 is less than x. So on the number line, I'm going to go ahead and start labeling with a -6, -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1. And we have -4 as our endpoint, but it's a strict inequality. It's strictly less than. So I'm going to go ahead and put a hollow dot at -4. Because it's a strict inequality, I know that that endpoint is not included. And x is greater than -4 is another way of saying -4 is less than x. So x is greater than -4. So I'm going to put my arrow off to the right here. And so converting that to interval notation, I would have a lower bound of 4, no upper bound, so it goes to infinity. Because the -4 is not included, it would use a parenthesis, so not included. And then infinity always uses a parenthesis. Now this is an interval of x values. We never think of it as like an ordered pair. It would be a lowest x to a highest x. All right, on this next example, I'll start by doing the number line, just like on the first two. So I want to go between -3 and +5. So I have -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the -3 is not included. So I would put a hollow dot. I would call it a hollow dot at -3. And the +5 is included. So -3 is not included because it's a strictly less than. And +5 is included. So I would put a solid dot or filled in dot there. And now x is sandwiched between those two. And so I would end up with a line between them. So that would be the number line for that inequality. And that will help me write the interval notation. So -3 is not included. So I'd put parentheses, -3, comma, 5 is my upper endpoint or upper bound. And I would put a bracket to include the 5. So parenthesis means it's not included. Bracket means that the endpoint is included. And then I always go from a lower bound to an upper bound. Or smallest x to the highest x. If there's no lower bound, you use -infinity as your lower bound with a parenthesis. If there's no upper bound, you use +infinity as your upper bound with a parenthesis.